So I'm so happy to have my mentor and great friend, Richard Barrett, which I love a lot, to be with us. Richard founded many years ago, a couple of decades ago, the Barrett Value Center, which has influenced so many people seeking to improve themselves, grow in their leadership, and transform. And also recently founded the Academy for Advancement of Human Values. Believe that. And Richard is also the president of that organization. So welcome, Richard, with us today.
Well, thank you very much, Eric. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you for this, next 45 minutes?
Yeah, that's right. And Richard and I, we've been talking over the last 2 years a lot about values, but also about my own transformation. Richard has been one of the few people that took it upon themselves to help me elevate. And today we're going to talk about caring for the soul in the body, which I think is so convenient in the context of embodied spirituality, because there's so much disembodied spirituality. So Richard, can you tell us why you care about that? Why do you care about this subject? What does it mean for you?
Yes. First of all, I think we need to understand who we are. The most important question, actually, is who am I? So in a lot of my writing and in my podcasts and videos, you'll see I affirm very strongly that we don't have souls, that we are soul, and the soul is in this body. And the soul comes from a larger dimension of existence. Let me call it the fourth dimensional energetic world. And as the soul incarnates into what I'm calling the three-dimensional material world, it enters into that world to learn how to grow and evolve. And I'll explain why it needs to get into the three-dimensional material world to grow and evolve. So let's just, first of all, let me say that, when you die, you don't lose consciousness, you just go back to that fourth dimensional energetic world. And your soul is always in that world. And that's a world of complete connection and love. So when the soul descends into the physical body, actually, it doesn't descend into the body, it actually descends into the cells that make up the fetus, or the embryo, actually. So the moment the embryo forms, sometime at that point, the soul is part of that embryo. And it's almost like it's in agreement with the souls of the two parents. And so the soul enters the embryo, and for the first 3 months, that embryo is actually growing and developing, and it's living in soul consciousness or soul awareness. However, what happens is, after 3 months, the reptilian mind brain forms. Now, the reptilian mind brain is the body mind, and so this is about the embodiment of the soul. So here comes the body mind, which is its sole function is to keep the body alive so that the soul can experience three-dimensional material reality. So now the link between this embryo, which now becomes a fetus, by the way, the moment the reptilian mind brain or body mind forms, the soul now becomes the subconscious of the body mind, because the body mind is dominant. It's basically helping that little body to stay in homeostasis, to stay in internal stability and external equilibrium. And in the womb, anything that disturbs that internal stability and external equilibrium, like, for example, the mother drinking alcohol or taking drugs, it's obviously felt inside that baby's body. And so there's a disequilibrium. And so the soul, which is representing the subconscious of that dominant body mind, feels this pain or feels the disturbance and begins to feel that, it's a bit awkward being in this three-dimensional material world. And it begins to learn, how shall I put it, imprints. And so by the time the baby is born, if the mother hasn't been careful about caring for this child, this soul in the womb, in this baby, then when the baby is born, it has significant imprints about not feeling safe in this world. And I can now go on to the next step, but let me just stop there in case there's something that you would like to ask at that point.
I just want to share that, as you know, most of my life, one of my biggest fear, actually my biggest fear was to be rejected. And a couple of years ago, when a rebirth energy healing session, I discovered that my mom was a smoker. And I knew this already. And that the fetus, when it's inside, feels rejected, threatened with all this smoke coming in. That my mother was a very loving mother, but maybe some of my feelings of rejection came from that, from the fetus. So when I realized that, I forgave my mom, who died 27 years ago. And now my feeling of rejection are, I think, mostly healed, mostly.
So yes, and and those deep imprints, they're very difficult to eradicate later in life, because from a psychological perspective, you have to be taken back to that experience and given that experience a new meaning, because at the time you had that experience, you didn't have a sufficiently developed mind to give it a meaning. And so as soon as the body mind feels discomfort, it represses the discomfort to the subconscious, which is the soul mind. And the soul mind doesn't know what to do with it, because it has no memory of being in three-dimensional material awareness for. So it becomes an imprint. And that can stay with you, as you point out, for a long time. So at this point now, the baby is born. It comes into another aspect of this three-dimensional material world where separation shows up in its fullness. Now, so the baby is born, it's living, its dominant mind brain is the body mind, the reptilian mind brain. Meanwhile, the limbic mind brain, the emotional mind, is growing and developing and doesn't really become dominant until about 18 months. So during those first 18 months, any experience the baby has of not getting its needs met, which might mean I've got a wet bottom, or I'm hungry, or I feel abandoned, or I feel cold. But any experience that baby has, the body mind of that baby has, where its needs are not met, is repressed to the soul mind, and the soul learns that being in three-dimensional material awareness is very difficult and not safe. It doesn't feel cared for, feels abandoned, if you want to put it that way. And so now we get to the point where the limbic mind brain, the emotional mind, begins to take over. And at the same point in time, the feelings of separation that come from not getting the body's needs met during this first stage causes the soul to create a psychic entity called the ego. And the whole purpose of the ego is to protect the soul from these feelings of separation. So it becomes a buffer. It becomes a buffer, but it is actually created by the soul in order that it doesn't feel the pain of separation, of being in the three-dimensional material world. And of course, we all know what happens next. The ego takes its job very seriously. But it doesn't know it was given that job by the soul. It has no awareness of that. But it, at a deep level, it knows it has to survive. And the body knows it has to survive. And why? Where does this need to survive and feel safe come from? It's basically the soul's will to be present in this three-dimensional material world. So you can't read any, you won't find in any scientific textbook a definition of where the will to survive comes from and the will to feel safe. But that's it. It's basically the ego and the body mind are actually linked to the soul. So the soul now is actually the unconscious. So the body mind became the conscious, and then the soul mind with the subconscious, and then when the ego, when the ego, or when the limbic mind brain, the emotional mind became dominant, the body mind became the subconscious, and the soul mind became the unconscious. So now at this ego stage, when the limbic mind brain or the emotional mind gets into trouble, or not into trouble, but feels it's not being loved or cared for, it doesn't know what to do. It needs to go on functioning, so it represses to the body mind. And so the body mind now is having to figure out how to deal with not feeling loved, and it doesn't know how to do it. So again, it represses all the way down to the soul mind. So now we grow through to 6, 7, 8 years of age, when the neocortex, the rational mind, begins to become dominant, because it doesn't fully develop until we get to age 20 or 21. So now the rational mind has experienced this three-dimensional material awareness. It experiences things which don't get it, where it doesn't get its needs met. It represses that to the subconscious, which is the emotional mind, and the body mind is now the unconscious of the emotional mind, and the soul mind is the super unconscious. So that we've lost contact with the soul by the time we're 7 or 8 years old, except there are individuals who sailed through those processes and still have that sense of soul awareness. Let me again stop there and seek your comment.
You know, Richard, we will talk throughout the conversation, but you know, there's a lot of spiritual teachers now, New Age. One of my friends calls them the New Cage movement, where they teach about transcending the body and we're all one, and you know, just dial your new vibration level and the whole world will feel good. And I look at all that, and it doesn't sound right to me. You know, we are incarnated to live in a body. Yes, we have a soul, but it is part of the journey to recover our soul. You know, Carl Jung, I think, documented that we need to live in our ego to finally rediscover our soul. It's part of our path. Can you share your thoughts a bit on that?
Yeah, sure. So I just want to correct a little thing. You said we have a soul. No, we are the soul.
Yeah,
I know. We are the soul.
Yeah, I know. You're right. Thanks for correcting me.
No, it's okay. So here's the interesting thing. This second stage of development, the first is survival, the reptilian mind, brain, body, mind. Then comes the second stage, which is conforming, which is the limbic. The emotional mind needs to conform in order to feel safe. So during that period, from 18 months to about 7 or 8, when the mind doesn't feel safe, and this is now we're talking about the ego mind, when it doesn't feel safe, and it's repeated painful experience, it does exactly what the soul did. It creates a psychic entity called the alter ego, and it may create many alter egos. And so the same pattern begins again. So the soul created the ego as a buffer to keep pain away, and now the ego creates psychic alter egos as buffers to keep the pain of not being loved away. And that's when the alter egos get developed. Now, let's assume you don't have too many alter egos and you manage to get through this. Now we move into the differentiating stage, which is the stage of roughly the stage of the development of the rational mind. And the rational mind, the neocortex, isn't fully developed till we're 21 or 22. And so I often say, you know what, teenagers do stupid things because they don't have a fully developed cortex. And that's absolutely true. I mean, I'm sure you did stupid things. I did stupid things.
I did, yeah.
You know, it's like, okay, I mean, I just didn't have a fully developed brain, that's all. However, the truth is I didn't have a fully developed mind. So during these first 3 stages, surviving, conforming, and then the next stage is differentiating, there are different needs. So the needs in the surviving stage, not from the moment of conception up to age 18 months or 2 years, the biggest need of that fetus and the baby is to survive. And so it needs nurturing. It needs to get its physiological needs met. Basic physiological needs. It has to be fed and watered and cleaned and etc. etc. And above that, it also needs to be loved. It needs to feel a sense of connection in this very strange new world that is in. Now, the next stage, the conforming stage, the child needs to feel loved and accepted, and it needs to feel that it can express who it is, and not be put into a box and compressed down and controlled. It needs to learn to be in this three-dimensional material world, but it also needs a sense of freedom to express itself. And that's the period usually when all our creativity disappears. The creativity we were born with just disappears because we just have to conform get into this box about how things need to be from our parents. If our parents are self-actualized, then they understand that, and they allow the baby they give the baby some rules, or the child some rules, but they also allow expression. They trust the child, and the child learns to trust the parents.
Have you actually met a lot of parents that are self-actualized? I've not met many.
No, no, there was not. And
I wasn't. When my kids were born, I was not. Yeah.
I'll explain why in a moment. But then let's get to the differentiating stage. So the needs of the first stage, the survival, are physiological needs. The needs of the second stage are love and belonging and respect. And the needs of the third stage, when we actually, 8 or 9, we begin to leave the home and go into our peer group and go to school, we need to be recognized. You know, we need to be appreciated for who we are in this larger dimension of life. We've now going out of our safety zone in our home. We need to move into a safety zone in the larger world. And the reason we feel good when we are recognized by other people, particularly our parents. So if our parents don't spend time with us, if we are not in the in-group at school, then we will not feel recognized, and we will feel like outliers in this world. And this is when, you know, the period when in America, for example, the school shooters are developed because they're not welcomed. They are into their peer group. They feel alone. They're not recognized by their parents because their parents don't spend time with them. And they're crying out for recognition, and they're willing to go in and kill people to say, look, I'm here. Yeah. So it doesn't happen so much outside of America because, you know, you know, the gun laws are much stricter. But what does happen is these kids become depressed. And so when does suicide take off? It begins to increase significantly around the age of 15. Yeah, and these are big, not recognized.
In Canada, I've read that there's a lot more tentative of suicide below 15 years old now. It's like an epidemic.
Yeah. It's getting, it is. And I think that's because, as you pointed out, there are not so many self-actualized parents. The parents are more focused on their own needs and their kids' needs, and the kids feel abandoned, and they feel, first of all, disrespected, and they don't feel recognized. So they're saying, you know, what the hell am I doing here? I don't have a sense of belonging in this physical world and in this construct of this parental construct and my community construct. And so this is a dangerous period for the teenagers. It's a dangerous period because if they don't feel that sense of connection to their parents, and if they don't feel the sense of connection to the community, they will align themselves with whoever does care for them. And this is when radicalization takes place. This is when it can happen in the Christian world. It can happen in the world of Islam too. I mean, you know, we talk about Islamic fighters, you know, these days, but you go back 300 or 400 or 500 years, and that's exactly what the Christians were doing. It's just the same old stuff repeated. Anyhow, so now we're up to the 21 and 22, and the responsibility for the care of the soul in the body has transferred from the parents now into this separate psychic entity, which is represented by an ego. And the problem with the ego is not a problem. It's the fears of the ego, the fears that the ego learns during these first 20 odd years of life, which are the problem. And some people then never move to the next stage of development, which is the individuating stage, where I'm able to let go of the beliefs and the values that I was taught by my parents, if I didn't align with them, and find out who I really am at the deep level. And so individuation requires freedom and autonomy to discover who you are, to go out and make mistakes, particularly in an organization where you're trying to find some sort of sense of meaning and find achievement in the world, actually a sense of achievement. And so you want to be able to try different things, explore, make mistakes, learn, figure out what your skills and talents are, and explore them, which then leads us into the next stage of development, which is really the first stage of what I call true soul activation. So up to this point in time, up to the age of late 30s, certainly we've been actually following more or less a biological pattern. We couldn't go any faster than our 3 mind brains could develop, so that's what takes us to 21, 22, and then we have to individuate in order to get to the true beginning of soul awareness, where it's all about self-expression. People call it meaning and purpose, but actually for the soul, it's about self-expression. And that's significant, because getting through that individuating stage to the self-actualization stage is extremely difficult, because for a large proportion of the world's population live in cultures which are repressive, oppressive, and any free thinking is stepped down upon. I mean, that's the situation in North Korea. It was the situation in the USSR, and still a little bit the situation in Russia. It's the situation in various parts of the world still. And so people are unable to individuate. So they lock down into satisfying their survival, safety, and security needs, either because they live in a repressive regime, or they learn so many fear-based beliefs that these fear-based beliefs crop up and keep them anchored in these lower levels of consciousness. Back to you.
Isn't it true, Richard, that in the West, it's also the same? It's not as repressive as Russia, but people are stuck in what I call the societal program. Maybe I learned this from you, where it's really about performance, money, and consumption. But people, and I've had experience of that. If you foray away than that, I've been called crazy so many times, and I say, what you call crazy, one day you may call genius, or it's someone that's stepping out, which is really rare in our society.
Yeah, and I think, so here I just want to make a plug for the Academy for Advancement of Human Values website, aahv.global, or you can go to barrettacademy.com. Barrettacademy.com is perhaps easy to remember. And on that website, you'll find a description of what I call the ego-soul dynamics, these stages of psychological development, but you'll also find the beginning of my research into what I call worldview. Some people may have known it as spiral dynamics, but I'm taking that to a whole different level and explaining how worldviews actually are formed. In fact, today I'm in the middle of writing that book, so I just stopped writing in order to be with you. So every society, every nation lives from a particular worldview, and if you want to figure out what worldview your nation is in, you can again go to the barrettacademy.com, and on there you'll find an atlas of global consciousness, and you'll find a list of all the worldviews and what worldview your nation is currently operating from. Now, I call that the Global Consciousness Indicator. I've linked it to worldviews, and I developed this consciousness indicator for nations about 2 years ago, and 145 nations are mapped to consciousness. Now, the interesting thing is, in the next 3 to 4 weeks, I'll have the second lot of data. So I have data for, I did it in 2017, the data was from 2016. Now I'm doing it again in 2019, the data from 2018. We'll have 2 data points, and I'll be able to tell you exactly which nations are advancing in consciousness and which nations are falling behind in consciousness, and why. So I'm really looking forward to the results of that work, which should be coming to my desk in the middle of May or earlier, and I hope to produce report and data in May and June to talk about that. So anyway, we have got off topic a little bit, so that sort of answer your question? Can we
it answers my question very well, only to say that once your soul is expressing itself, it takes a lot of courage to continue, because it looks like society wants to shut you down, you know?
Exactly. So what is it? So people say, okay, you know, when I get to my 40s, this self-actualization stage, it's all about meaning and purpose. Well, not for the soul. That's for the ego. It's about meaning and purpose. Because the soul knows its meaning and purpose. My God, it already knows. So for the soul, it's about self-expression. How can I express myself? And to self-express, here's the point you're making. You have to overcome your fear. And so if you can't, particularly, let's say if you're a woman in your early 40s, and you have a husband and you have children and you've got aging parents, who comes last? Obvious question, obvious answer, you do. Now here is the link back to the energetic dimension. If as a woman in your 40s, you don't allow yourself to self-express, by the late 40s and early 50s, you're going to show up with breast cancer, because that's the 5th stage of development. It's the 5th chakra, which is up here. It's this throat chakra, which is expression. It's the and so the incidence of breast cancer significantly increases in the late 40s and early 50s. Now, that's the self-expression, the 5th stage of development. The 6th stage, which occurs in the 50s, is now I've learned to self-express and find out what I'm good at so I can express it. I now want to, as the ego says, make a difference. And what the soul says is, no, I want to connect, because I can't make a difference if I can't connect. And this is the problem for men. And why is it a problem for men? Because at the 2nd stage of development, that relationship stage, at age 2 to 7 or 8, they learn not to show their feelings. You have to be strong. Don't cry. Don't show your feelings. So by the time we come to our 50s, men don't know how to connect. They're programmed not to connect. And guess what happens? Towards the end of the 50s, there's a link between the 6th chakra and the 2nd chakra and prostate cancer. The incidence of prostate cancer takes off around late 50s, early 60s. It may come earlier, it may come later, but that's when it takes off. And so, first of all, we've got self-expression, then we've got connection, which links to making a difference, and then we get into our 60s and we want to be of service. That's what the ego says, I want to be of service to the world. But the soul is saying, no, I want to contribute. You see, the ego is still evolved in service to the world, and the ego thinks, yeah, you know, I've got to change the world, I've got to do this, I've got to do that, it's got to be big, because it doesn't. The soul isn't concerned by size or quantity. It's concerned by quality of contribution, and it may be to one other person, it may be to a small group, or it may be like Gandhi to a whole nation. But the essence is, in the 60s and beyond, is contribution. There's nothing else to do. Now, again, if you were able at the 3rd stage of development, the differentiating stage, to feel respected and recognized, when you come to the 60s, you feel confident going out into the world. But if you don't feel confident, if you didn't get that respect and recognition in your teenagers, you won't feel confident to go out into the world and contribute. And that would then, now we begin to see another illness appearing. And these, we're talking now about the seventh chakra, which is there, and the diseases of the brain, Alzheimer's, all of these diseases which affect our functioning in old age are coming from our inability to contribute. Because at the third stage of development in our teenagers, we never built the confidence to go out into the world and be there and do something, because we just didn't get the confidence from other people because we didn't feel respected and recognized. And so here we have the journey of the soul, all the way from the moment of inception, all the way through to, well, my age, not quite your age. Yeah, I'm acknowledging you're definitely younger than me. But there we have the journey of the soul. And it's one of hiding away because it's in pain of separation, discovering then it's programmed and controlled by its environment in order to get its needs met. And then it begins to say, oh, okay, wait a minute, I'm not this. I'm wearing a mask. I'm wearing the ego mask. I can strip off my mask and find out who I really am. And that's when we get into self-actualization. That's our self-expression. That's when we get into connecting so that we can make a difference. That's when we get into contributing so that we can fully live our connection to other people. Because at that point, we get to the idea that actually we're all connected at this higher level, fourth dimensional energetic world level. And then I give to you, I'm actually giving to another aspect of myself. That's the key, you know. These are the keys, the 7 keys, if you like, to caring for the soul in the body. Let's put it that way.
You know, I think it's Ram Dass that said, when you serve someone, realize that you're serving God, and by serving God, you're serving yourself. So in the end, by serving someone else, once you realize all that, unfortunately, Richard, for me to get to this, because I incarnate a lot of that, it took a lot of suffering. And as you know, and the people know, I mean, I almost lost my life doing it. I almost took my life away because I was so in pain. I wish, my greatest wish, that we teach this transformation process to every human being, you know, in school when we're young. I think it needs to be done in high school. So, because, you know, there is teenagers that take their lives away. I think there's undue suffering. I don't think we should eliminate all suffering, but I think there's undue suffering because the lack of knowledge of the transformation path.
Yeah, I agree. And that, you know, I've written 3 or 4 books now that deal with this topic: evolutionary coaching, what my soul told me, the values-driven organization, the evolutionary human, and so my last 4 books, one every year, have all dealt with this topic. And hopefully, my next book after the one I'm doing on worldview, which is the 2nd volume of Love, Fear, and the Destiny of Nations, which I'm working on now, the book after that actually fits the theme of our talk today, because it's going to be called Parenting the Soul of Your Child.
Beautiful.
Which is really what we've been talking about.
Yeah. I mean, maybe you know him. I think it's Dan, some psychologist in the US, who says, you want to be a good parent, heal yourself, and your being will become a good parent. And most people don't even know that there is a healing journey. Most people don't know. No. And sometimes I'm wondering if the powers that be don't want to prevent healing because they can control the population. I don't want to get into all this, all these things, but it is very profound. And you know, you've had your own journey, you know, of life. You had a previous career, changed career, and maybe you can talk about that, because this was the beginning. I'm sure you're not born, I'm a soul living a life. At some point, you were living a traditional life like all of us. You became an engineer, and I'm an engineer, and we're very much in our heads. We get trained to be in our heads with precise answers. There's only a good answer. Maybe you can share, because it's quite...
I've always been interested in psychology and spirituality, even from the age of about 18 or 20, although I was doing civil engineering degree and then a transportation degree. This is what I was reading in the background all of the time. And I became very successful as a transportation engineer, started working at the World Bank, reached the self-actualization stage, and exactly on time in my mid-40s, I suddenly realized I was totally bored with my career.
Yeah.
And actually, what I was interested in was transformation, not transportation.
Yeah.
And so I then had to figure out how to leave the World Bank,
Yeah.
because at that point I was setting myself up for a six-figure tax-free pension,
Yeah.
and go off and without fear into the world and do something that I had no qualifications in, and nobody knew me. And my friends at the World Bank said, "You're a complete idiot." And I said, "Yeah, maybe so, but I cannot not do this. This is what I have to do." And that goes back to, it took me 6 or 7 years to work myself out of the World Bank. In 1952, I started the Barrett Value Center, and I've never looked back since. It's been quite a journey, but it's been an amazing journey. And I invented the 7 levels of consciousness model, which led me to the 7 stages of psychological development, which led me to the worldviews, which I'm going to be talking about now, and I'm going to be writing about now. And so, I'm still learning. As you know quite well, we all still get triggered by these beliefs that come from our first 20 odd years of our lives, where we learned limiting beliefs about who we are and what we can do. And so it's a continuing journey, absolutely continuing journey. But if you know you're on that journey, and you know that it's actually about learning how to be in a 3-dimensional material world, it's how your soul learning how to be. Because in the 4th dimensional energetic world, where the soul goes back to after the body dies, there's only love.
Exactly.
If there's only love, then how are you going to learn? You have to descend into the material world, where you learn, where fear comes up. In order, the fear actually allows you to learn how to love, if you can overcome the fear. And that's the key.
You and I seem to be on a similar program. I was an engineer. At 45, I was awakened. Okay, I need to do something different. But in my case, it took 5 years to gain the courage, and I almost lost my life. So, but I was told that it was part of my process to actually rediscover true love, which we talked about that before. In my coaching, I'm a very loving coach. I love people. Actually, my purpose is to love them like no one's ever loved them, which involves me loving myself. But Richard, I want to talk about on a big scale. You talked about nation. Let's take what you just talked about at the level of nation. You are in Italy now, but you're born and usually live in a country that's going through a crisis now with Brexit. And you, as an observer, I keep saying to American friends, I'm just a humble Canadian, so I'm just going to say what I think. And I'm not a threatening Canadian. But I look at all that and I'm saying, what can we apply that to the journey of a country? The country's crisis to transform, maybe.
That's exactly what I'm writing about right now, because the seven stages of psychological development are intimately linked to what I call the 9 stages of collective evolution, or collective psychological development. Mm-hmm. And so the most advanced nations at the moment in terms of the collective psychology are the Scandinavians plus New Zealand and Switzerland. And there are only about 7 nations at that level. And I call that people awareness. Well, that people awareness corresponds to the 4th stage of psychological development, which is the individuating stage, where we learn how to be free. We learn about freedom, we learn about responsibility and accountability, and we learn about equality. Now, these nations have learned about equality, and so they're operating from what I call people awareness. Now, the question is, how do they move? Where do they move to next? And I call that humanity awareness. However, the problem that several of these nations are facing, Iceland, Sweden, Denmark, Norway, is that they were so sort of like open. They accepted many immigrants, and these immigrants came with a different worldview, and that catalyzed a reaction amongst the people in those nations who still hadn't evolved to people awareness. Whereas there are people who are living at people awareness, 1 or 2, some living at humanity awareness, but the people who hadn't quite got to people awareness in those countries now felt threatened by these people coming in with a low level worldview.
Yeah.
And that's what, so these nations now are absolutely struggling to maintain people awareness. And at the same time, they are, I believe they're ready in many ways, and a lot of people are ready in these nations to move to humanity awareness, but they're being held back because of these struggles which have not been fully, they haven't fully worked out. When all of these immigrants came in, well, what does that mean to us as a nation? And so I was on a conversation with a couple of Swedish people 3 days ago, and a very interesting question came up, which I absolutely love. And the question is this, in organizations, everybody's talking now about, well, what's the purpose of our organization? And the question that came up is, what is the purpose of our nation?
Yeah.
What is the purpose of England? What is the purpose of the USA? What is the purpose of Sweden? When that came up in the conversation, I was like knocked over.
Yeah.
Because it's the question we're asking in all our organizations, but we're not asking it at a societal level.
No. It's a very good question. There used to be a day, I think, where America, the US stood for liberty, freedom, human rights. As a neighbor now, I don't think it's true anymore. It's, there's so much things that are going on. As a Canadian, we've always been peacemakers. We've never declared war, except with England, to be free. But, we've gone around the world we used to have the blue beret to bring peace, But what's holding us back now as a nation is our attachment to oil. And, you share with me that we're quite high in consciousness, but gender equity is very low. We need to learn from the Scandinavian countries. But my view is that we could be a player in the world to bring this conscious leadership, just because I live here, obviously. But
okay, so I'm going to give you, some intro. So Canada is the one nation just below people awareness. So what I'm looking to see in the next 3 or 4 weeks is, did you graduate to people awareness or not? And you're absolutely right. One of the key issues that's holding you back is gender equality.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that really needs to be worked on in Canada. Now, what's happening to the USA is, and you can see this in the Economic Intelligence Unit's Democracy Index, it's slipping down the scale. And it's moved from, so if you've got these highest nations of people awareness, and you've got Canada, the upper end of what I call wealth awareness, USA is actually descending down into what I call nation awareness. It's actually going down a whole level, and its ranking in terms of consciousness is going down. But again, I'll have some more data in 3 or 4 weeks, and I'll be able to share that on the Academy website.
But you'll be able to observe, we have an election in Canada in November. And the current party has been, challenged, and the opposing party, which is conservative, is like a mini Republican party. And it's not looking good, for me as a nation, where I feel that we might be degrading in our expression of our values. Yet the people in Canada have very good values. I think we don't have the leadership that really resonates.
So, my understanding of what's been going on, apart from this gender inequality, is, the corruption thing. And it's been a big headline throughout Canada, protecting jobs because and not tackling corruption, even though it was clearly obvious there was corruption, I believe.
Yeah.
And so, that speaks to values, and and this problem started at the very top. And I'm very surprised by your president, or
Prime Minister,
your Prime Minister, because he came in with such a fanfare of values. I thought, wow, and he built a cabinet of men and women equal. I mean, it was like, wow. He's arrived, the savior. It was a bit like Obama. He's arrived, the savior, and yet he's not been able to live up to those deep values which say fairness, transparency. We're not going to have any form of corruption. He's not. I don't know to what extent, but I've just been reading the newspapers in Canada about that, and
you're absolutely right.
I can't judge it, but I can just say, well, that's what I'm reading.
It's concerning a lot of people, especially since two women were demoted as ministers because they stood up to
Yeah,
their values. So there's a lot going on. And Canada, I think, is going through a teenage crisis now. We're going through a crisis. Through that, with the election, will define the next 4 years. And I think we have a lot of work to do, you know. And I
okay.
know a lot of Swedish people like you, Finnish people. I think they're much more advanced in their consciousness.
Yeah, I'm not Swedish.
No, I mean, you know people from that
Oh,
country.
yeah, yeah.
And but you know, I guess let's go back to your country, England. I think it's going through a crisis as well, which will make
Absolutely.
England grow, but may bring suffering short term for a while.
Well, the same issue in England as it is in or UK as it is in the USA is inequality. So wealth awareness has got to the point where the gap between the rich and the poor has got so large. There are those who left behind.
Yeah.
These are the Brexit people, and those who didn't get left behind and see the future with Europe. And these two, it's become polarized, and it became polarized under Trump. And Trump, gave the appearance of being on the side of the people who got left behind, where actually he's not.
Yeah.
But they can't see that.
Yeah.
So it's the same issue, I think, in both countries.
Yeah, but I think you're making the point that countries also go through their own crisis. Countries have a level of consciousness, and to rise, sometimes we need, you know, breakthroughs happen after breakdowns, and sometimes the breakdown creates suffering for people. So, Richard, one last question. You know, you're 74 years young, I think. You know, when we come to a certain level, and you could be playing golf every day or whatever British people do every day when they're, you know, retired. You're working as hard maybe as you have ever done. So you have a purpose, you have a mission, you love what you do. What is your, how do you feel every day your soul is expressing and contributing to humanity? And I know you bring wisdom, but what is your greatest wish, you know, for you, for your work and for...
Okay, so for me personally, I don't have a vision and mission anymore. My only mission is to be the servant of my soul, because my soul speaks to me every day. It tells me what books to write. It tells me what to put in the books. It guides my self-expression, and I'm able to do that more and better if I can my life. And so my whole journey is about releasing fear. Last year, I went through a very difficult year where I actually had to learn the lesson of living what I teach.
Yeah.
Trusting my soul. Yeah. And it was really hard. Yeah. And I got through it. But what I found was that I had to let go in order to get through. I had to let go of being needy in order to get through. And that for me meant letting go of level 1 survival needs around finance. I just had to let go, you know, and once I'd let go, wow, I was free to fly again.
Yeah.
And it just goes on like that. I've noticed it several times in my life. I had to let go in order to find the space to expand, because when your glass becomes half full, you get stuck, and then you need to empty it in order to fill it up again.
Yeah, we get it. I'm going through the same, as you know, and we get attached.
Yeah.
And then we cannot become who we're supposed to become if we get attached to who we've been. So it's so I guess you're working hard to get out of your own ways so your soul can fully express, you know. So
yeah. And you know, I did a course on psychosynthesis, which I've known a lot about for a long time, but Roberto Assagioli, who actually used to live in Florence, just 30 kilometers from where I am now, he had this phrase which was, you know, everything we identify with dominates.
Yeah.
So when you identify with something, it dominates you. So he has a famous meditation which says, I have a mind, but I'm not my mind. I have a body, but I'm not my body. I have emotions, but I'm not my emotion. I am pure spirit. I like to say I am pure soul. And then I can totally trust my soul to take charge of my life, because I am the soul. And that goes back to the very beginning, because I am a soul in a human body. Yeah. And wow, it's hard at times.
Richard, we're going to wrap up. It's so beautiful. I know why I do what I do. It's very selfish because I bring all this wisdom to me. I attract all these wise people like you. But I think everyone who's going to watch it is going to get so much out of it. So thank you very much, Richard.
You're very welcome. Bye.
Bye.